Welcome to the next show, and welcome David to Hamburg.
Hi everyone, great to see you again.
Fantastic to have you, and we have a great guest today, Nathalie Nahai.
Yes indeed, our guest this week is Nathalie Nahai. She's an author, consultant and technologist who works at the intersection of technology and consumer behaviour. And Nathalie is here to talk to us about how consumer behaviour is changing in the 2020s and what that means for you, so stay tuned.
And we invited her and several other speakers to talk about systems in the show, because our theme for the next conference is Hug the System. We want to explore how systems can help or hinder us and how we can change them from the within. And you have a thought about that or two, I think, as well.
Yes, indeed I do. In my endless quest to understand the systems that govern our lives, I saw a story recently that really piqued my curiosity. So let me talk to you about that right now.
Looking forward to that.
This is a thought about the future of work. We've been thinking about it since March 2020, since the pandemic began, and we're still thinking about it now. The pandemic exposed a set of norms and traditions and conventions around our working lives that really no longer made sense anymore. But before the pandemic, it was quite hard to see or acknowledge that they didn't make sense. So we just kept turning the handle of this machine and working the way we've always worked. Part of that was around where we work. Like, how did it make sense for millions, billions of knowledge workers every morning to go to a certain location, often sometimes taking their laptop with them, open that laptop, do their work, and then come home in the evening? The answer was, of course, it didn't make sense. It hadn't made sense for years. And the pandemic gave us space to acknowledge that and change it. And we now live in a remote and hybrid work world. But there's another huge question coming down the pipeline, and that's not about where we work, but how much we work. And I think this is the really transformative question for the decade we're living in now. It's a question that's underlined by a set of really powerful ideas, or further questions really. And those questions are, look, why do we have this set of amazing productivity tools now? You know, computers, smartphones, the internet, and yet we seem to work as long, as many hours, maybe even more hours than we did in the 1970s. How does that make sense? Well, there's a set of experiments coming down the pipeline now that are going to address this question. In fact, one is happening right now. Thousands of workers across the United States are participating in an experiment to shift to a 4-day working week. It's run by an organization called 4-Day Week Global, who are associated with the University of Oxford. And this is how it works. So 30 companies are taking part, including the big Kickstarter platform in the United States. And the workers shift their hours down to 32 hours a week, running across 4 days a week, down from 40 hours a week running across 5 days. So it's called the 100-80-100 model. You take 100% of your pay, you work 80% of the hours, and you attempt to retain 100% of the productivity. We're all looking to see how this experiment plays out. Now look, a 4-day working week is nothing totally new. Back in 2019, Microsoft in Japan trialed a 4-day working week with their workers. They found that productivity actually rose 40%, and now the Japanese government are encouraging all Japanese businesses to shift to a 4-day working week. And Panasonic are the latest Japanese company, very recently, just a couple of months ago, to do just that. So as I say, we're all looking to see how this trial plays out. It's an idea with a long history. I mean, way back in 1930, the British economist John Maynard Keynes asked, how long will people keep working the way we work now? And he predicted that early in the 21st century, we'd be so productive that we could shift our working lives down to just 15 hours a week. And people have long been asking, what happened to that future? What happened to that utopia of leisure that Keynes and other people around him imagined? I have a pet theory on this, actually. I think we do have the productivity tools to allow us to shift to working far less. I mean, has anyone really studied how much of the working day of your average knowledge worker is taken up with things that would have once been called leisure? You know, social media, maybe YouTube, maybe going to the gym or going for a run during the working day. I think that we have the tools to work far less and be as productive or maybe even more productive than we are now. But that's just my pet theory. It needs to be proven, and experiments like this are the big next step when it comes to proving this idea and shifting to an entirely new model of our working lives.
Joining us from Barcelona today is Nathalie Nahai. I'm super happy to have her on the show. She used to be a speaker at Next, I can't remember, 15 or so, and I was really blown away by the thoughts that she shared back then. She's a professional speaker, author, consultant, podcaster, I don't know what else. And she explores the intersection of persuasive tech, ethics, psychology behind evolving consumer behavior. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Could you, to start with, explain a little bit what persuasive means in this context? Like, what is persuasive product design or tech? What does that mean?
Sure. So persuasive technology, product design, UX, it's speaking to the ways in which we design different experiences, platforms for people to elicit certain kinds of behaviors. So much in the same way that you might put at a crosswalk or a pedestrian crossing lights to show you when it's safe to cross, that's also persuasive technology. It persuades you to comply with certain rules. Online, in platforms, on social media channels, etc., technology is designed in a certain way in order to facilitate or encourage certain behaviors and to increase friction or barriers to others, to prevent those. So that's basically what we're talking about when we think about persuasive technology, how to enhance or diminish certain behaviors.
And this can be done in a good or in a bad way, I presume.
Yeah.
So what do people have to look out for when they design, for example, an app or some other application?
So anything that ends up becoming coercive, where you're encouraging someone, a user, although I really don't like that term, where you're encouraging people to engage in behaviors that either they don't choose or that are not good for them. And then that's another big issue, is who decides what's good for people or not. But when you're coercing people to engage in a behavior that they would not otherwise engage in, that, generally speaking, is going to be an unethical practice of these sorts of principles. So a good litmus test for this is to ask yourself, would I feel comfortable if this particular user experience, user journey, platform was given to my child, my mum, my partner, to you, someone that you love, that you want to protect? Would it be okay if they use that? And if the answer is no, then you know that something is happening that shouldn't be happening. So it's this sense of the silver rule. Do not do unto other people what you don't want to have done. If you don't want your privacy to be invaded and your company's engaging in practices that cannibalize people's privacy, then there's a dissonance. So then the question is, okay, what do we need to readdress to make sure that we're applying persuasive principles in an ethical, facilitatory way?
And you do consult companies in that kind of space? Is that what you still do?
Yeah, so I'm also a behavioral science advisor to a company that looks at some of these sorts of aspects. And part of the role there is to talk about ethical implications and say, okay, what would it look like if we applied these principles in X context? And with companies that I consult, it always comes up because companies, especially now, are much more attuned to the fact that if they want to have longer term sustainable success, it means cultivating relationships with customers that are built upon trust, that create a sense of safety, and that afford a greater attachment. So in order to do that in a personal relationship, you have to be honest with someone, they have to know what they're signing up for, and it has to be consensual. And so, of course, if we're talking about ethics and persuasive technology, a big piece around that is building trust, building in consent, and making sure that people know what it is they're signing up for. So yeah, that's absolutely vital if you're going to be successful. If that doesn't exist in the mix, it's not going to yield positive, successful stories for the business.
Absolutely. We will come back to that whole question of values in a minute. But before that, I would like to ask you, how do you see consumer behavior changing at the moment? We see companies can't even pick up with the speed of change that their consumers show. So what is changing? What do you see?
So the pandemic has accelerated and catalysed a lot of changes in behaviour that we were already seeing anyway, and especially big shifts within younger populations, so Gen Z and millennial groups. So whether it's conscious consumerism, which is a term that's been around for a while, or it's concerns around sustainability or body positivity, social justice issues, issues around race, around gender. All of these issues, of which there are many, many more, are much more spoken about now. They're much more public. Many of these issues are reduced in stigma, so it's much more possible to engage brands to talk about them. And so we're seeing this shift from previous generations, which maybe were less aware of these issues or unable to speak out. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into why certain generations express concern about certain themes and not others. But we're seeing a huge shift from younger folks. So a couple of really interesting statistics that I found in the research for my book. Around 62% of Gen Z folks who began entering the workforce in 2020 prefer to buy from sustainable brands, which is something we're seeing also with millennials. 40% of millennials, that's nearly half, will actually accept one job offer over another, even if it incurs a pay cut, if that company has better environmental credentials. And if you think about the fact that by 2029, which is 7 years, consumers now who are born between 1981 and 2012 will make up 72% of the workforce. We're talking about a majority of the workforce caring a lot more deeply about these issues. So if organizations, businesses, brands want to attract these people, whether as consumers or employees, they have to be able to meet these deeper needs for a greater environmental and social conscience.
Absolutely. How do you think companies can approach that?
Well, I think part of it is woven in with the questions we're hearing a lot more about in terms of purpose and meaning. And so what's interesting with the many interviews I conducted for the book, one of the themes that kept coming up again and again and again was that if your company does not have certain explicit values or a particular purpose at the heart of their business, then they're not going to attract people into that business because they'll choose places to work where they are being met on those deeper levels. So we know, for instance, that when it comes to employee activism, nearly half of employees have spoken up publicly either to support or criticize their employers' actions regarding key social issues. And so given that brands and businesses and organizations are under greater scrutiny than ever before, if as a business leader you can look at your company and say, okay, beyond profit, what are we aiming to do to help the planet, to help people? We're seeing a huge burgeoning of interest and companies signing up for the B Corp certification, where they put these other important elements into the mix. So it's not just about profit, it's also about key stakeholders, the environment, social impact, etc. I think the fact that we're seeing so much interest in B corporations and other alternatives shows that actually, if you can be a business that reassesses not just what you do, but how you do it, then you'll be much more likely to be able to attract folks and meet their deeper needs.
Speaking of your book, you recently published the new book, Business Unusual, with interviews you conducted, I think more than 20 interviews you conducted with great thinkers like Cindy Gallup, David Rowan, and others. Can you give us a little brief what the book, the key findings on the book are?
Sure. So the book really looks at the big changes that we've touched on a little bit here that are happening in the world of work, but that's just one lens on a bigger societal humanitarian shift. So people waking up to social justice issues, environmental issues, economic issues. There's a sense that everything is much more interdependent and interconnected than before. So with this book, I highlight what are the key trends that we need to be aware of. What are some of the most robust and useful and powerful psychological frameworks we can use to understand why people are shifting in terms of their behaviors and motivations, and how we can give them a greater sense of self-determination, or how we can begin to map out a company's values and how that might fit with an audience in terms of the way that you create your organizational culture, the branding, the content. It also looks at some of the challenges and opportunities of remote work, being on screen all the time. So thinking about everything from reduced trust in one-to-one online interactions, to psychological safety, to building space for more honest feedback. It looks at what we can do when we're thinking about rupture and repair, so practices and techniques you can use to engage people in more volatile, uncertain conditions when there's more anxiety around. And it also looks at some of the ways in which we can future-proof our businesses by creating businesses that are embedded in a set of values with integrity towards a larger purpose. So it kind of looks across that whole gamut of human potential, really.
But it also shows that you have to cover all these topics to stay successful as a business, I guess.
Yeah. I think the tricky thing is as well, it's one thing to kind of, we all would prefer, I think most of us would prefer to have simpler solutions, especially when the environment is so complex and overwhelmingly so. And so it could have been a book that would have been maybe looking at one or two of these things. But I think, and this is something I explore in the podcast, when you look at the scale and complexity of the interconnected crises we face that are now becoming more present on a day-to-day basis in the Western world, which other parts of the world have been dealing with for decades already, if we have any hope of developing a more flourishing, regenerative system, whatever part of that system we're engaged in, including business, then we have to have some tools that cover as much territory as possible in a coherent way as possible. And that's what I attempt to do with this book, is to give people starting points so that wherever you are in your business, if the bit around values is most resonant and useful to you in this moment, you get given sort of a door through which to go in and have a look at what you can do in your business with the different models. So it's really giving people a lay of the land so they can then choose what to focus on first.
And if I got that right, you also have some kind of value map that you introduced to exactly do this. Could you explain a little bit what you can do with this?
Sure. So the Values Map is a free online tool that I developed in collaboration with Dr. Kiki Leutner of Goldsmiths University. And it's built upon Shalom Schwartz's theory of human basic values. And so what it does is it takes, and I write about it a little bit in the book, but it takes the framework of human values and creates a questionnaire. It's only a 40-point questionnaire, which anyone, you listening to this right now, you can go online and you can do it. And it looks at how values show up in your business. So it's much more geared towards businesses than towards individuals. And the idea is that when you complete this questionnaire, it will give you specific insights and advice on how, well, first of all, what the values are that you cherish and that you uphold in your business, how to express them through branded content, through organizational culture, whatever sort of aspect of the business you can care to imagine. And then it gives you also examples of other brands and businesses who share similar values. So you've got practical, tangible examples to look to. So the idea is that it takes something which is perhaps a little bit less tangible, the idea of values, and creates a roadmap and practical, insightful feedback to help you start on that journey. Because after all, like, if this knowledge isn't applied and if it doesn't actually change the way we do business, then it's not going to have very much impact. Yeah. So my hope is to have some positive impact with it.
Is there some kind of advice you would give leaders who want to dive deeper into this value exploration with their employees, or just for themselves?
Yeah, so sure. So first of all, try the values map, see how you get on with it. And then if you want to dive deeper, you can reach out to me. You can also reach out to Dr. Kiki Leutner. We do work together and advise companies on how to enact these values in a more kind of deep dive, specific context of the business that you're dealing with. So that's kind of the place I would start, is read the bit in the book, check out the values map. And then if you want to find out more, you're very welcome to reach out to me.
Cool. I would like to touch upon one more aspect that you mentioned, how to feel safe in a place, be it the workplace or feel safe as a consumer. Could you elaborate a little bit how you could create a safe environment, especially in a virtual world?
Yeah, so it gets quite tricky. I think the first thing to say here is that safety, much of it is predicated on having a sense of trust with the individual you're working with, and also psychological safety within your team. So if you think about trust as something which is interpersonal between one individual and the next, and psychological safety being among many members of a group, they are interconnected. We know, for instance, from research that if you are meeting someone, a team or an individual, for the first time online, so that's the first meeting is virtual, it takes much longer to build trust. So you have to be much more mindful about creating an environment in which you are actively encouraging people to contribute, to share. You're eliciting insights and advice. So it could be something like saying to people, we want to hear from you. You have information and expertise that are really valuable to this team. It can be making sure that you have chances and moments to check up with people's emotional states, which is something that pre-pandemic in most countries just wasn't happening. It also means having a sense of empathy with people, so giving people space to talk and making sure that you've understood by listening and then mirroring back so that you feel that you've gotten the right information. I think the other thing also to mention is that remote work can impact people in quite different ways. Obviously, there's a lot of contextual stuff that will shape how someone responds to remote work. But there was also a really interesting personality study that was conducted that looked at 3,200 British workers by Chijibere Ogbonaya, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Sussex Business School. And he found that people who generally score higher for openness, agreeableness, and extroversion generally report less feelings of worry and depression when working from home, compared to people who have higher scores in neuroticism or low conscientiousness, and they're going to be more gloomy and worried potentially from extended periods of working from home. So we also have to think about not just trust and psychological safety, but also the personality traits of our team members and what their needs are. So there's a lot to consider within that. Also, obviously, giving people greater autonomy, flexibility, not using tools that surveil people because that completely erodes trust. There's a lot that we can unpack in that particular area.
Was there some aspect in one of the interviews you conducted for the book that struck you the most? Like, can you pick one thing that you said, oh, wow, I didn't know that, or that was surprising?
So I think one of the things that I found particularly striking when I spoke with Dan Pink about how businesses can motivate and engage people, especially when they're feeling remote. And I've got a quote here that I'd like to share with you. He said, "Start with the premise that you can trust the people you work with. If you begin with the opposite premise, as many organizations do, the best you'll get is compliance. You'll never get excellence." And I think that's absolutely fundamental when we're thinking about how to keep people engaged and whether or not we are engaging in practices, whether it's clocking hours or surveillance systems, that undermine that trust and therefore elicit compliance, but they don't elicit a greater intrinsic or internal motivation and attachment to the organization. So if we want excellence, trust is absolutely fundamental. And that's something that came up across a whole multitude of different interviews. So that was the main thread, I think, really in the book.
And what does that mean if you take a look at consumers, the relationship to consumers? Can you elaborate a little bit on that aspect as well?
Sure. So I think when it comes to consumers, more and more of us are buying from brands and buying items that are in alignment with our values. So what are the things we care about? Do you want to be more sustainable, or you want to be carbon negative, whatever it might be? And so in order to build that trust in a consumer segment, you have to think about integrity. Can you trust the brand that you're engaging with as a consumer to actually be doing what it says it's doing? And so in the book, I designed a framework which is quite simple to remember to help consumers assess and then decide upon whether or not a brand has as much integrity as they need in order to give them their money, buy from them. And so the 4 C's in this framework include commitment, so making a public commitment to certain specific values or ethics. The brand needs to be able to do that first and foremost. Then being congruent in word and deed, so being able to demonstrate that they're putting their values into action. The 3rd C is about being consistent over time, so building a track record where consumers can look at a brand and say, okay, well, they've been upholding these values in their actions for X amount of time, so we can trust them. And the 4th C is about coherence, which is about intention and behavior, doing the right thing for the right reason. And this usually means looking at brands that have been doing good things for people and planet way before it was cool. So Patagonia is a good example of this. Ben & Jerry's can be an example of this. So if you have commitment, congruence, consistency and coherence, and it gives you a full sense of integrity, that's a really good litmus test for consumers to say, okay, with all of these elements fulfilled, I can trust this brand to actually give me what I want in a way that's in alignment with my values.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So alongside trust, is there anything else we need to keep in mind to build resilient business?
So the other framework that is absolutely vital is the framework of self-determination. And this is something which, if we're able to meet our need for self-determination over the course of our lifespan, we feel a lot more integrity within ourselves, which is really important for a healthy sense of self-identity and self-worth. And it gives us a greater feeling of well-being. So self-determination. And what it means is meeting 3 of our deep, universal, innate psychological needs. And these are our needs for autonomy, so to have agency, to have a sense of power or control over our immediate environment. That comes back to the persuasive tech thing. Do you facilitate an experience, give people autonomy and agency to choose, or do you reduce that? The second is competence, so giving people the skills and ability to obtain or reach their goals. So if you're talking about that within the context of advertising even, are you advertising to people in alignment with their values on a specific platform that they have the skill to use? And finally, relatedness, which is about our desire to belong and have positive, fulfilling emotional relationships with the people that matter to us. So if you can give people autonomy, competence and relatedness, whether that's in the world of work or on the consumer-facing side, that will be absolutely fundamental. If you get that together with trust, then you're off to a very, very good start indeed.
Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. I would love to invite you now to join our little game we want to play with each and every speaker, which is the Next World section. So imagine this. There's an acute crisis on planet Earth. A crack team of technologists starts a new chapter of humanity. Together with 1,000 pioneers, they will travel to the planet next one to establish a new base, a new home for humanity. Thanks to your achievements in psychology, you are amongst the first pioneers to travel to the next planet with us. But before you may board the space shuttle, you have to answer 5 questions. So this is question 1. Please name one luxury object that you would take to your new home.
It would either have to be one of my guitars, or it would be some kind of screen that could play films and music. Yeah.
Bring the guitar. We never know whether we've got electricity up there, but bring the guitar.
That's true.
Which book should everyone read before boarding the space shuttle?
So there are so many books here, but the one that I think would be most valuable at this moment in time is a book by Rob Hopkins, who is the Transition Town pioneer. And it's called From What Is to What If. And it looks at how we can use collective creativity and imagination to redesign our systems to become more regenerative. And that looks at everything from schools, how you build schools, how you build resilience within food systems, economic systems, communities, how we raise money and funds and resources for things. So I think as a way in which to envision the new community or society that gets created, that one provides some great examples of how to create a more flourishing future.
I will definitely read that one. Please name one exceptional person you would like to take.
So I noticed in the sort of context that you gave, we're talking about just technologists.
No, it can be anyone. It can be anyone.
Challenge you on that one. It can be anyone. No, but I mean, in terms of the pioneers that get to go to this place, I think we need way more interdisciplinary conversation and collaboration. And so the person that I would choose would be Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who is a scientist, mother, a decorated professor, and she's an ecologist and an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. And she wrote the most beautiful book called Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and the Teaching of Plants. Yeah, it's become, and rightfully so, an absolute bestseller. So I would invite her to make sure that we're going in with both eyes open as opposed to just the kind of Western kind of psychological lens, scientific lens.
Great. Could you create one law that bans something from the new planet forever?
Yes, people giving monologues in conversations when they should actually be listening to the other person. It's something that I find, on the one hand, deeply frustrating, and on the other, it's often the source of great grief and discomfort and conflict, not being able to hear the side of the other person. So I think something like that is quite a facile answer I've given you, but being able to listen to other people by not enabling monologues as much.
Good idea. And the last question, could you name one tradition you would like to take from Earth to the new planet next one?
I love this one. Yeah, it would be the celebrating of the turning of the seasons. Now, this obviously is predicated on the idea that there will be seasons on the other planet, which there may not. But if there are, I think that's something that in many parts of our world we've lost. And we only have a couple of traditions now in the Western world, certainly like Christmas, Easter, that's about it. But I think traditions that bring us together and that put us into greater contact with the living web of life are something that I think are really beautiful and important, and that would be wonderful to take to the next planet.
Let's hope we have 8 seasons or something, so we can celebrate more.
I like that, yeah.
All right then. Thank you so much for playing this little game with us. You may now board the space shuttle and fly away with us. Thank you so much for this conversation, and hope to see you soon in Hamburg.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being our guest today, and thank you for watching. I also would like to thank our partners, Accenture Song and Factor 3 for their support. If you would like to meet us in real life, please simply apply for a next conference ticket on our website and meet us in Hamburg in September. And I hope to see you there. Bye-bye.